Welcome to a new episode of Mind Your Mind, the podcast dedicated to all frontline workers around the world in different positions, different levels of expertise. Today, I am very, very happy because I am with Michael Allison. He is a Polyvagal Performance Consultant, educational partner of the Polyvagal Institute, and founder of the Play Zone. Such an amazing piece of work that you're doing, Michael, and I'm so thrilled that everybody will get to hear from what you're doing. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me here. And it's good to see you again, even though it's not in person, but we met in Oxford, and it's nice to reconnect on the screen.
Amazing, because I was thinking about exactly that, the fact that we met in Oxford, and when I saw you and heard you, I thought, oh, everybody in Mind Your Mind should be hearing what you have to say. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Play Zone and what motivated it to start with?
Yeah. So when I first started to explore polyvagal theory, it made sense to me in the world of trauma and healing, but it also really made sense to me in the world of performance and well-being and wellness and managing what we would call stress, but not necessarily what we would label trauma. And it just made so much sense to me that an application of polyvagal theory in that avenue in wellness and performance would be really helpful to a lot of others, including myself. And so I started to integrate Stephen Porges's work in a language and in a methodology that was taking the organizing principles of polyvagal theory, but expanding it out to, in essence, how do we relate to how our body is responding to the pressures to perform? Whether it's on the stage, whether it's at work, whether it's even in your own household, right? There's this, from my perspective, there's this relentless ongoing pressure to perform to certain standards or to others' expectations or even our own expectations in essentially all the roles that we play in life. And so for me, it was really helpful to understand then how our physiology and how we're having these adaptive reflexive reactions to the pressures that we're facing, how that essentially influences how we act, how we react, and really importantly, how we interact with one another. So that was my quest then, was to how do I take Steve's brilliant body of work and in a way integrate it and share it to those who don't necessarily need to understand his complex language, but they can actually apply it in their own life and learn to relate to their own bodily reactions in a way that might help align their physiology to truly support their intentions or their values or their goals or how they want to show up in the world. So that's what
Yeah.
brought me to Play Zone.
Yeah, fantastic, because it's so applicable to what brings us to this podcast as well, because I'm constantly thinking about the environment in which frontline workers are working in, which is consistently stressful. It's like the high pitch of stress, it becomes the norm. And by being the norm and being constantly in that place of pressure, and stress, my question has been exactly how do they manage to maintain resilience, to maintain well-being, to function to a level that also will allow them to thrive as well in their careers and in their
Right.
life as well, no? Because as you were saying, it's not only about you, how do you show human, as we were talking as well about this with Mati Chisco in previous episodes. How do you show human at work, at in your personal life as well, when you are constantly in that place of stress, in a high level of stress?
Yeah, that's the question, right? And to me, part of that answer is aligning with our physiology or meeting our body where it truly is and not masking it, not pretending it isn't feeling a certain way, not pushing our emotions down, not just plowing through. So you said a lot in what you just shared. And a couple of things that stuck out to me is resilience.
Mm.
Well, we often define resilience as just getting back up after you get knocked down. And that's not how I'm defining resilience. I'm defining resilience as this being able to flexibly navigate a variety of physiological reactions and different states in the face of challenge, while also recognizing and being able to welcome safety and connection and moving back into a physiology that would support our recovery. So to me, resilience isn't just grit and determination and driving through and getting back up after being knocked down. It's more about flexibly navigating and
Mm.
relating to how our body is reacting to the environment. And frontline workers, I look at them as professional athletes. I do a lot of work with professional and high level athletes in a variety of different disciplines and teams and coaches. And they have support teams, right? So a professional
Yes.
athlete has their coach, they have their teammates, they have a physio, they often have a mental performance coach, they have all kinds of resources.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really look at what those resources are doing from the polyvagal perspective, if they have the right team around them, what's really making their performance sustainable or even improving their performance on game day, it's the relationships, it's the trusting connections that they're forming. Because in those interactions that are supportive and trusting and
Mm-hmm.
even playful,
Mm-hmm.
that's when the healing, that's when the recovery, that's when the building up the buffer for facing higher levels of challenge takes place. And then in the face of high level challenge, like a frontline worker, they have more resource already because they have these relationships
Mm.
outside of that challenging event that can buffer them in the face of challenge. It's a really important piece. And I think frontline workers, they don't necessarily have these teams that are dedicated to support each of them like a professional athlete does, but yet it's vital. It's vital. And so how do you at least simulate that as a
Mm.
frontline worker? Well, I would first say, well, it comes down to at least that group really acknowledging that us feeling like a team,
The team.
what we're
Mm-hmm.
doing is really, really vital for our own resilience and our own well-being and our own overall health, and how to actually manage in the face of tremendous challenge, how we're actually able to manage our bodily reactions in that situation.
Mm. Two things that comes to mind with what you're saying, because I think what I'm hearing as well, there is a starting point that has to do with getting to learn and get used to notice the body reactions as well, no?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think what we see, and I don't know enough frontline workers, but I would imagine it would also be true. What we see in a lot of very successful high level performers,
Mm-hmm.
even in the world of business, who
Yes.
are just clawing their way and fighting through to get what they want, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we see it all the time. In a way, that fighting through and that going after everything that you want without any consideration of the other, and in a way, looking at everyone else as a competitor in your way, in a way, it trains out the connection to the feelings. It trains
Yes.
trains out the ability to actually feel what the body is actually saying, how the
Mm-hmm.
body is responding. We would say you get a numbness to it. And
Uh-huh.
what we're saying is that becoming numb to our body, becoming numb to the signals that our body is sending back up to the brain, saying, hey, this is what's going on inside my deeper, more survival oriented reflexes in my body. When we numb those out, we're actually interrupting the vital feedback loops that support our internal environment, that support our health, and that support us in connecting. So it might work
Yes. Uh-huh.
short term, but it's not going to be sustainable. And that's where we're going to see bodies that are seeking ways of feeling and
Mm.
moving into other types of behaviors that could be self-destructive or that might be high risk behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And so we
Yes.
see it play out in professional sports. We see it playing out in all kinds of things. And then we see it eventually
And I
lead to
see it as well played out
burnout.
in
We see it burnout,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And I also see it played out in frontline workers. You know, it's so common to also find issues around drug use and risky behavior, and eventually, yeah, get to that place of burnout. And so burnout also comes to with what you're saying. It comes like a complete disconnection as well from what I need. And I think it's something about that I'm calling a lot for frontline workers and the people that I work, is that moment of pausing. Take a moment to understand, what do you need today?
Yeah.
And get started from that place of understanding yourself. But that requires practice as well, because we are also, I think, in a society that stimulate that disconnection more than the connection, right?
I would agree. I think
Mm.
in a culture that, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, like we started, to me, there's a lot of pressure in
Yes.
so many different roles. And we're not even talking about people who are marginalized and are who are in that. There's another level. I mean, there's all different levels of expectations
Mm-hmm.
and real competition, right?
Yes.
And rapid, unpredictable change in our
Mm-hmm.
own little communities around the world. So, from the survival perspective of the body, the nervous system, the subconscious, that's dangerous. That's risky. That's unpredictable. So, in that case, the body will at first begin to mobilize. It will begin to recruit resources to try to either fight that battle or get away from, run. But if it's relentless and it's in almost every area of our life, right? And we don't actually find ways to nurture the body like you're talking about, eventually it's overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so some nervous systems will respond to that overwhelm with complete collapse, like their body takes them out. They have maybe it in the short term, maybe it looks like they have a weekend off from their work and they sleep all day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're just, or they're completely checked out. Those are the signs of a nervous system that's beginning to feel really overwhelmed. And that's its way of kind of hunkering down and protecting and conserving what's left. And then they come back into the job and they have to mobilize again. And then they get time off and they're back into that hunkering down and collapsing. And so those are really good indications of a nervous system and that deeper physiology beginning to move into that back and forth of mobilized and immobilized, but grounded in threat, grounded in defense, not
Mm-hmm.
safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's partly caused because this it's relentless. And
Yes.
and as it's relentless over time, one way of coping is to detach from the feeling, right? Because
Absolutely.
shutting down, even though shutting down is a last resort defense mechanism that we all share,
Mm-hmm.
it also full collapse in and of itself is dangerous and can only be done in a short period of time because we need oxygen to our brain. We need stuff moving through our body. So one way that our body, and not consciously, but one way that our nervous system adapts to that shutting down immobilization strategy is it numbs, it
Yes.
withdraws, sort of detaches from feeling, because that way we can still function, right? So again, I think it's helpful to point out that these aren't conscious choices, these aren't deliberate decisions. These are bodily reactions that are reflexive and adaptive, and they're meant to keep us alive. But when we know this, and we also can really understand what the culture is that we're really living in, maybe we have some agency here that we can now start to align with what's really playing out underneath. And can we begin to, as you were talking about, find ways to nurture the body? What does my actual body need to find some safety, to
Yeah,
start to
exactly.
trust again.
And by doing that, to find that nurturing of safety, to find the way of starting to do that. And because I'm assuming as well that, well, so many things, but one very strong aspect for me on all of these is that these are mostly unconscious processes happening in our body, mind, and the more we start to understand, that's why for me it's so important to have these conversations, because I want frontline workers to be aware that this is what is happening in our bodies when we are day in and day out working with the suffering of others as well, right? That we are in that fight and flight consistently. And the more we understand that, probably we can start to identify how to nurture safety, because what I'm understanding from what you're saying as well, from the polyvagal perspective, safety has a very important place to play in becoming resilient, in nurturing resilience in the long term, no?
Yes. And to play off of that, safety is not the removal of threat. So it isn't, let's frame that. So safety doesn't mean, okay, now I'm not working, I'm not under that challenge, therefore my body is safe because I'm not in that threat. That's not sufficient. Safety is a feeling in the body. And so what we need are sufficient cues, sufficient signals, sufficient relationships that actually nurture a feeling of safety. Well, what is a feeling of safety? Really, a feeling of safety is a reflection of the physiology being regulated by your nervous system, by your autonomic nervous system, in a way that is no longer diverting resources toward attacking or defending or protecting, but it's actually supporting health, homeostasis, growth, recovery, restoration. And when that body is actually in that internal state from which emerges a feeling of safety, right? So it's like, why do so many people crave vacation? Because when they think of vacation, they're thinking maybe they're on the top of a mountain, or maybe they're at the ocean, or maybe they're playing games with friends, whatever their vision is. The reason that we crave that feeling or that image is because it shifts that internal environment that we're actually experiencing that emotion from. So the emotions emerge out of that physiology, the stories and the images emerge out of that physiology. And when we get that image going, we can then shift our physiology back into that feeling. And that's that feeling that is representing homeostasis, representing an internal environment that's supporting our health, that's supporting our well-being. And simultaneously, what polyvagal theory really brings to light is that also supports social connection. And communicating safety and connection and warmth and welcome and even play with one another. And that's also just a beautiful but also really important concept.
And that's why teams are so important.
Yes.
That's why the relationship within your team is so incredibly important.
That's right. That's right. And that's, I say often, like, our biology is really craving that we feel as though we are part of a team. And I can go out and play, do my go in the front line, do what I need to do. And I know that my teammates have my back. I know that if I need some help, I can actually look and get some support from a teammate. And I know if I'm exhausted, I can go back to the bench and they can take over for me. Our biology craves that. In fact, it needs it. We need to feel as though we're part of a supportive and trusting and even playful team. So one of the ways to start feeling again, if we're numb, or one of the ways to start nurturing what our body needs, is to play with our friends. Like, that is essential. Play with friends is not just what you do if you have extra time in your life. It's, when you look at it through this lens, it becomes essential. It becomes a daily ingredient for well-being, for resilience, for performing in our job, right? Like to me, it's as important as any of the training.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yes, because it's in that place as well is where you will find. I mean, it's so amazing because making me think about so many fun moments and understand that those fun moments with your friends will actually support your resilience and your well-being at work. And also is making me think about this idea that was related to me that John Bowlby used to say that it was very important it was good to share, meals, for example, and to just go and talk and play, as you say, is a fundamental part of that developing of relationships, because there is that other element that comes to mind as well in the being connected with others and how we can co-regulate. Can you explain us a little bit about that
Yeah.
concept?
So for those who, well, first off, we all know that to be true,
Uh-huh.
right? When we reflect in our own lives and we think back about when we were under some sort of challenge, but yet we had someone we trusted with us, how that helped ease and soften the edges around that challenge. We all know
Mm-hmm.
that. We also know that some of our greatest memories in life are around friendships or
With
around
people.
even with our own children, those moments of really connecting and laughing and playing and all of that. We know it to be true. However, for any skeptics out there,
Uh-huh.
what polyvagal theory did for me, because I knew that to be true too,
Mm-hmm.
but I still didn't value it like
Uh-huh.
I do now in my life after really, really devouring polyvagal theory. And the reason is because the neural mechanisms, I'll try to make it simple, but the neural mechanisms that enable right now you and the two of us to communicate. Okay, so that enable our intonation and modulations of the frequencies in our voices,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that change the facial expressions that we have, particularly around our eyes,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually enable us to hear and extract those frequencies from all of the other sounds that might be around us at any time, right? Those neural mechanisms are interconnected to the vagal regulation of our heart, our lungs, and how that coordinates all of the other parasympathetic nervous system to really either, like we talked about before, either to optimize our health and well-being or divert resources to attack or defend. So our actual voice, facial expressions, body language, broadly
Uh-huh.
speaking,
Mm-hmm.
is communicating back and forth, whether we're safe and approachable or whether it's warning and uncertain.
Mm.
But they interconnect in the brainstem to the vagal, to the whole neural regulation of our internal environment. So that's the beauty. They're one and the same mechanism. So if I'm not feeling great and I'm
Mm-hmm.
in kind of a little bit of a funk, whatever you want to call it, what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? Well, that means that my physiology in that moment isn't in an optimal state to support homeostasis. Okay.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Now I come into a conversation with you and you are in a great state. Say you're having just a wonderful day and you just feel wonderful. And
Mm-hmm.
you start sending those cues to me through your smile, particularly around your eyes,
Mm.
through the tone of your voice, through your postures and your gestures and all of that. And I'm now subconsciously reading that. And now
Mm-hmm.
that is, again, connecting and changing my internal environment through those neural mechanisms. And so now I might all of a sudden be like, oh, I feel better too. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's what's cool about it. And that's what co-regulation is. Co-regulation is when technically we are beginning to help each other's internal environments become more neurally regulated in a way that supports not only our own health and recovery, but also our own ability to communicate that to one another back and forth.
Yes. And to learn and to play and to connect and to feel, as you say, that sense of connection, no, that is it feels like that feeling for me, that sense of safety also has to do with that sensation that everything is all right, I'm okay, it's
Yes.
it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
And it's
okay.
yeah,
It's gonna be okay.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
totally. And
Yeah.
so you can, I just had a conversation yesterday with a high level tennis player who's really in the beginning of the pro levels and all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really that's a really challenging time, which is
Mm-hmm.
very similar to a frontline worker, right? Like
Uh-huh.
every essentially every day they're facing challenge. Now
Uh-huh.
it's a tennis
Yes.
court. It's a tennis court. It's not real life, but the nervous system doesn't know any different,
No, no, no.
right? There's
Can't
still
differentiate.
right. There's a lot of uncertainty. You're going up against a competitor who is wanting to beat you,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's people watching, so you feel evaluated,
Yes.
right? There is really stuff on the line because technically, if you don't win, you don't accumulate points, so you can't move up the rankings. So you actually do have to win, right? So
Yes.
there
Uh-huh.
are factually challenges, and there's all these other cues that your nervous system is reading.
And lots of pressure, no?
Lots of pressure, right? So I have these conversations all the time. And so these kids, they're young, they're adults. I mean, they're in their 20s
Mm-hmm.
and and they are facing all kinds of this pressure and they don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they're following old paradigms of repress, of just I've got this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got this. And
Mm-hmm.
and really what I'm trying to get them to explore is actually it's okay to feel uncertain. It's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to feel really, really anxious and almost like you're panicking. That's a reaction. That's that initial, you're not going to stop that initial reflexive reaction. Now it's what do you do? How do you relate to that? How do you
Mm.
relate to that? And the goal there is what can you find? And so this is really relevant now because
Yes.
now we're getting into the actual moment
Yes.
of your environment, right? So a
Mm-hmm.
frontline, what is available to you in that moment that can help reconvince those very primitive survival networks in your body, which are really more in the brainstem, not in your bigger, higher level thinking. It's really
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
more primitive. What signals, what is available that will welcome, that your body will welcome as reassuring, as grounding, as safety, as connection. What is available? And sometimes that resource externally isn't really there, right? Like
Yes.
so I think of a frontline worker when they're helping someone in a really bad place or a really life-threatening place, they're
Mm-hmm.
not getting cues of safety from who they're helping. They're getting more and more threat and danger and uncertainty. So
Mm-hmm.
looking there for that isn't where we're looking, right? The environment, like so a tennis player, they have an advantage because often they're playing in a beautiful place. So they can look around. They can see a tree or they can see look over and they have faces. Maybe their parents are there, or maybe their coach.
Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
they have an opportunity, but often the cueing from the coach is not necessarily. Often the cueing from the coach or whoever's watching isn't sending cues of safety and reassurance either. So sometimes
Because they're biting
getting,
their
yeah,
nails as
exactly. So
well.
sometimes they're getting that
It's
kind of
like
information.
holding their head. It's like, oh, what's happening?
So, so it's but back to the frontline worker. So when they're in that environment that is absolutely dangerous and uncertain and unpredictable,
Mm, mm.
what is available in that moment? What can they do? And that's where you have some internal resource. So again, maybe they don't have any external cueing. If they're with their teammate, they can
They
have
probably can.
that here I am, especially if they've built that trusting relationship, like we were talking about, through
Mm,
play and through other activities together that build that bond.
mm.
Right? So now they have their teammate, but even so, they're still in essentially every situation, there's still internal resources available, right? There's
Yes.
still, what do I do with my breath? What might I change with my posture? Where can I put my attention? Even though all of these cues are coming at me that are uncertain and risky, where can I direct my attention that might feed that body, that nervous system, just enough sense of security, enough sense of enoughness,
Mm.
enough sense of quote, I'm putting quotes around it, control,
Mm.
that my physiology can recover into enough sense of safety that I can move through this challenge and really demonstrate my skill set, pull upon my higher level thinking that might be required to problem solve, or to have to be creative in this situation. Because what
Mm.
we're getting at, and that's what the play zone was all about. And the reason I called it the play zone is that we perform optimally when we have just enough safety, which means there's just enough that internal environment not being in a threat response. And it's really a physiology that would support play, a little more freedom.
Yeah, and it's a way as well to face challenge, because as you were saying, it's not that challenge will not be there. So it's about continuing and finding that way. No,
Yeah.
this is what could help us to continue facing challenge, continue overcoming our own limits sometimes, especially when we are learning or facing new situations. I'm thinking about for example, nursing students that are in their initial placements, and they are just going through so much and going towards their limits of their understanding and capacity and practice as well. So what I'm thinking with what you're saying is that we can face challenge, and that it is possible to go back to a restorative sort of place within ourselves, and that the way to get back to that place of restoration can be either using external clues or internal clues as well.
Yes, and relational cues.
And relational clues. Okay.
Relational,
Uh-huh.
right, which you could throw into external, but the
Yeah.
relational cues, for better or for worse, are very impactful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what we were talking about with, like, if you're looking, so if you're the frontline worker
Mm-hmm.
and you're administering care on someone,
Mm-hmm.
and your nervous system is reading their facial expressions, their body language. And if
Mm-hmm.
it is in a state of pure overwhelm, life threat, you're getting cued more and more danger, no doubt, right?
Yes.
Now, if
Yes.
your teammate, if you're administering care and there's someone next to you and they are with you and you make eye contact or even just feel their presence, that can be a giant cue of safety. Absolutely.
Yes.
Especially if, like we said, you have a relationship that's built in trust, and that you also know that professionally in this environment, they've got your back too. They're with you. They're competent. This is a together thing. The sense of feeling like you are part of something, that you belong and that you are with someone, is about as powerful as a cue of safety as you can get, right? But if we don't
Yes.
have that, if we don't have that, because sometimes we don't have that,
Yes.
and we have to drop into what is available, which are internal resources, right? And that we can develop through practice, that we can develop through daily routines that help to cultivate those resources that we can draw on in the face of challenge.
So this is also highlighting so much the importance of our relationships
Oh,
within our teams, within our organizations. How do we develop that? And how, because I'm also thinking about the fact that not everybody has the experience from early childhood of what it is to have a healthy relationship with someone or a nurturing relationship with someone. They may be experiencing difficulties with actually finding that place and that sense of belonging within a team, for example.
yeah. So they have a lot of history, right? And
Yes.
prior experiences that can challenge that capacity to actually feel safe with others. So let's unpack that. There's a lot in there. So we'll
Yes.
back. So we have this biological imperative that we need another
Yes. Mm-hmm.
to not only to not only thrive, but really to survive. Like, that's what distinguishes us from reptiles, is that social mammals, we actually need to be fed, We need to be kept warm, right? All of those things. And we need to be able to signal to our caretaker that we need to be fed and kept warm and all that. And so we also need, because of what we talked about earlier, those neural mechanisms that allow us to communicate, feed directly into our well-being and our internal environment. So we need to maintain relationships in order to optimize that vagal regulation of our physiology. We absolutely need it. It's vital. Okay. So, but let's go back in time. And in a relationship, especially a relationship that we were depending upon, like our caretaker in some way, if in that relationship our trust was violated because we were seriously hurt or injured, or because we were neglected and we'd cry out for help and no one was there, we have this history of experiences to when we feel a certain way in our body.
Yes.
That, oh, well, then that's when I need you, or when I reached out to you and now you hurt me, I was hurt. That now is an interruption to that. And that can retune my nervous system to no longer, and I like this is my phrase, it no longer trusts that it's actually safe to feel safe. Or we no longer trust that it's actually safe to trust. And so the healing and the growth is really this regaining this, it's safe to feel. It's actually safe to feel safe. It's safe to feel safe with another. And then it's safe to feel safe, and then unsafe, and then safe again, and then unsafe, and then safe again. So that's that resilience. And so that's the quest that we're on, is to recognize that, okay, I understand that being safe with another who I trust is really important. But yet when I get in close proximity, or when someone reaches out to me for a hug, I realize my body doesn't actually receive that. Okay, well, that's just information letting me know that for whatever reason, my body is not trusting that it's safe to actually trust in this connection. And now how might I help that? Maybe there's really good reason. Maybe it's not someone I do want to trust, but maybe it's just that pattern. Maybe it's when the body starts to feel safe, I have an association, consciously or subconsciously, that now triggers a defense reaction.
And I think one of the most important aspects of what you're explaining is the fact that this is adaptive. It's not a reflection of illness or something wrong with me or any of that. All of these reactions that we have to what we feel in our body is 100% natural.
It's natural, and it's important to mention it's not a fixed trait.
No.
It's a state. It's a physiological state. It's a shift. It's a reaction. It's triggered by something, and we have some agency once
Yes.
we kind of understand that, and when we begin to embody it, right? So it's one part of knowing that, which is the first part, at least for me. It's understanding and knowing these neural mechanisms and how this, and then it's beginning to start to just see that happening in your life. And recognizing how you feel, or even how you don't feel if we're numb, but just how much your perception of the world, or your sense of all rightness, or your sense of everything is awful, how that is changing. That's letting you know how it's fluid. It isn't necessarily locked, right? And so then you could say, well, I'm someone who's really burned out, and I'm just locked in this state of I don't even want to get up. Okay, let's look and see if there are any moments. Are there any moments in a day or in a week? Or if we start to imagine a time in your past when you didn't feel that way, does that change anything? Are there any flickers of any experience where your thoughts and your beliefs and your emotions are a little bit different than just everything's over? Right? So we have to start wherever we are.
Yes.
Have to meet the body where it is, and then we just
Yes.
find what can nurture that just enough.
Mm. And this requires a lot of self-compassion, right? Because what you're saying is actually meeting oneself where we are at, wherever we are at, without much of a self-criticism or anything else. No, that internal dialogue that sometimes can be so negative as well, and feed that sense of lack of safety or lack of that sensation of everything being all right. You have given us already few clues and few steps to move towards nurturing this sense of safety and well-being. Is there any um, favorite actions that you have that
Sure.
will nurture that we can share with our audience, and that probably they can also try and see if it
Yeah.
works for them?
Yeah. Great. One thing I wanted to flag in what you said there is that it requires self-compassion, and self-compassion emerges naturally when we're in a more connected and grounded and quote safe.
Mm,
So I often don't start with asking someone to be compassionate to themselves. Where it starts typically is just actually the understanding of, look, these aren't your conscious choices. These aren't deliberate decisions. This is how your body is reacting to the pressure. Okay. And can you see that? Can you agree with me on that? And okay, so I'm not asking for compassion yet. And
mm-hmm,
then we start just looking at the stories, because then typically what happens, at least a performer,
mm-hmm,
is they're getting swept away by the stories they're experiencing,
uh-huh,
right? So they get swept away by all of this negative self-talk or doubts or criticism. Why can't I do this? Why does this always happen? Da, da, they start. So where I reframe that, instead of, I don't ask yet to, can you be compassionate with that? I just say, can you look at that as information?
mm-hmm,
That is simply information. That's your higher level thinking, trying to make sense of how your body's feeling. So all it means is the body doesn't feel comfortable enough, doesn't feel safe enough, it doesn't feel in control enough, it doesn't feel confident enough. That's all.
mm-hmm,
So let's not worry about this, what's going on up here. What can we again feed into the body, into that more primitive neural networks that are really in the brainstem? What can we feed that it can start to actually feel more comfortable, feel a little more connected, and
mm,
then see what happens with that story. Let's not worry about anything in that. That's just information. And then that can lead to the compassion. That's how I approach it with high level athletes. Often they're so grounded in their toughness that compassion is too soft. Right?
yes,
You get what
yes,
I'm saying? So that's just how I frame it. But it ends up providing a moment to have compassion, because you stop believing the stories, and you get
mm,
into just, how can I re-regulate this physiology? How can I align it to feeling more comfortable so that now my skills can emerge? So that's the first part. And so that leads into the main practice, or one of the early practices that I do. I just call it the habit of safety. And I think
okay,
Maddie might have mentioned it in the talk that you had with her. And to me, it goes back to what we were talking to about the frontline workers, that in any environment or
mm-hmm,
any interaction or any challenging situation that we're facing, we can still find and feel and ultimately absorb what is available that is safe or reassuring or grounding. And
mm,
so for me, if I'm walking into an environment that is unfamiliar, that I don't know anyone, or it's saying I'm going to present something to a crowd, I'm going to first just really orient to the whole space. And I'm going to, even though my nervous system is picking up everything, I'm going to direct my attention to, if it's people, I'm going to find the faces that are actually sending me cues of connection
uh-huh,
and happy, and they're smiling or whatever it is. And I'm going to deliberately put more attention on those faces.
And that is an action that you can do deliberately. That is a
Deliberately.
conscious decision
Anywhere,
that you can,
anywhere
yeah,
you go. Like, so you
yeah,
could
yeah,
walk
yeah.
into a coffee shop, and
Yes.
even though your nervous system is picking up all of these signals, way more than you could ever collect consciously,
Mm-hmm.
you can put more focus and attention on the features that would be cueing reassurance to your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
you could focus on what's not. So what I'm saying, the habit of safety is finding and feeling and absorbing what cues are available to you in that external environment, in relationships, in people's faces, right? In their tone of voice, in their body language, and then in your inside, in your own environment, right? So we know that breathing is a reflection of our physiology, but we can consciously, deliberately change it to change our physiology. So
Mm-hmm.
breathing is a resource. We also know that when we move into different states, we have different levels of metabolic output, which can result in different levels of muscle tension in different
Yes.
places. So we can deliberately change muscle tension. We know that when we're speaking and we're in a state of threat, how that changes the neural regulation of the larynx and pharynx. So our voice is different in the speed and the tone and the modulation. So
Yes.
we can deliberately, I think, as Maddie talked about, we can deliberately slow down our voice. We can change our tone, which then sends signals back into the brainstem that say, hey, you must be okay because you're talking with prosody. Oh, you must be all right. So we find what resources around us, within us, and between us that actually will reassure the brainstem that you're actually okay, even though the environment is being detected and interpreted as dangerous and uncertain. And that's happening all the time. So wherever we go, this practice you can do, right? It's not a practice where you have to sit down and do a practice. It's a practice where anytime you walk into a space or you're out on a walk in nature, you can really deliberately, your nervous system's picking up anyway, but now you can start becoming really good at where you're putting your attention. That to me is more of a vital skill than thinking. To me, it's not about controlling thinking. It's not about
Mm.
positive thinking. It's about recognizing the thoughts as information about what does my physiology need, and now directing my attention toward what are those sources that my physiology welcomes.
Absolutely. And the more we practice, the more we start to identify the ones that work for us, right?
Yeah.
Because is I think part of getting to know ourselves and finding that sense of safety also has to do with understanding what works for us, because it won't be the same for everybody. I love this. I will definitely practice the habit of safety more now. And I think it's a fantastic way as well to end the episode for today and give you a massive thank you, Michael, for being there, for explaining all of this that sometimes may be difficult to grasp and understand so clearly. And just to say to everybody that is listening, to give us a like, send us a comment, send us a question, and share this information. If you're thinking of a friend, of a colleague, someone that is around you as well, that you feel they could benefit from hearing this episode, please just share it and help us to help more people to work on their own resilience and gain that so needed well-being for everybody, especially in the area of frontline work all around the world, really. So thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure to be with you here today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.